أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أهلا ومرحبا بكم هذه الحلقة. Welcome. I'll do the rest in English, but inshallah another time we can do these lessons in Arabic inshallah. So if we do both it takes longer. بياخد وقت أكتر بقى. Okay. Inshallah. So last lesson we spoke about the effects of Ghazwat Uhud, the Battle of Uhud. Spoke some about some of the shuhada, Sayyidina Hamza ibn Abd al-Muttalib, Hanzal ibn Abi Amir, and Lusayr ibn Amr ibn Thabit ibn Qais. So these were very beautiful stories. Al-Usayrim was an example of somebody who delayed his conversion to Islam until the day of Uhud itself, and he converted after the Muslim army left Medina, and then he converted to Islam, and he went out to fight with the Muslim army, and he died as a shaheed. And this is an example of somebody who never prayed a single prayer in his entire life, but Allah gave him the honor of dying as a shaheed. Now, after the Battle of Uhud, the Medina Muslim army was battered badly. It was beaten on the day. The Quraysh army was still nearby the very next day, and they were thinking of going to Medina. They realized that Medina was weak, and they thought Medina was weak and defenseless, and they'd beaten the Muslim army the day before. So they were thinking of going to Medina. They exchanged messages with the Muslim army, and they agreed to meet at another place called Hamar al-Asad, again very close to Medina. And Prophet ﷺ, as soon as he knew about this, he mobilized the Muslim army again, the same Muslim army that fought the previous day. And these were tired, they were injured. Some of them, 70 of the Muslim army had died as shuhada the previous day. Most people would be in no mood to fight again. But the people who fought, they got up and said, they are ready to fight. And Allah revealed these verses from the Quran talking about them. الذين استجابوا الرسول لله وللرسول من بعد ما أصابهم القرح للذين أحسنوا منهم واتقوا أجر عظيم. So there is a great reward for them. Now the defeat it had an effect on the prestige of the Muslim state throughout the Arabian Peninsula. The enemies of Islam saw that the Muslims could be beaten. They had been beaten. So the hypocrites in Medina started attacking Muslims, not physically but verbally. The Jews, Bedouin tribes. I spoke about some of these Bedouin tribes, and one person, a head of a tribe, a man named Khalid ibn Sufyan, was preparing to go and fight against the Muslims. So the Rasulullah sent Abdullah ibn Umays to assassinate him before this army, this tribe could come. Bani Bakr, I think, would come and fight Medina. So he sent Abdullah ibn Umays, and before he left Medina, Abdullah ibn Umays asked the Prophet, how will I know what he looks like? He'd never seen this person before, Khalid ibn Sufyan, before in his entire life. So the Prophet replied, the sign of that you see him is that you will feel fear. Your skin will crawl, you'll feel fear when you see him. The Prophet didn't describe what he looked like, but he said how he would feel when he saw him. And sure enough, when Abdullah ibn Umays went there, he saw him and he felt that. And even despite the fact that he said to the Prophet, I've never felt fear, been afraid of anybody in my entire life. At the same time, this person, on his way to assassinate this person, Khalid ibn Sufyan, he made his own ijtihad. It was time for the prayer, and he was afraid that if he were to go and kill this man, it would take a long time and he might miss the prayer. So his ijtihad, it was that while he was walking towards his target, he would pray while walking at the same time. His name, the prayer is Al-Talib al-Matlub. So if you look it up in the fiqh, you'll find Salat al-Talib al-Matlub. Some of the other tribes, they sent, a couple of other tribes, they sent messages to the Prophet saying, we are interested in learning about Islam. Please send us teachers, people that teach us about Islam. So there were two different tribes. In both cases, Rasulullah sent people out to teach them. These people were ambushed in the middle of the desert and slaughtered. And one particular tribe, the Prophet sent 70 teachers and they were all slaughtered. And because of that, Rasulullah made the dua al-qunut al-nawazil. So every prayer, every fard prayer, at the end of the last rakah, you make a qunut. The Prophet Rasulullah make that dua against this tribe that had slaughtered 70 people. They deceived them, Muslims, in order to send them out some people, and they slaughtered them. And lastly, spoke about the Jewish tribes. Again, after the Muslim defeat at Uhud, there were two Jewish tribes left in Medina, Bani Nadir and Bani Qurayza. Both of these tribes had reaffirmed that they had a treaty with the Muslims, saying that they were allies and they would help each other in times of crisis. So, what happened was one Muslim man accidentally killed two people that the Prophet had personally handwritten protection, a letter that they're carrying, where the Prophet guaranteed their safety, and they were accidentally killed. So the Muslims had to pay compensation for accidentally killing those two persons, two non-Muslims. So the Prophet tried to raise enough money for the compensation money amongst the Muslims. Muslims were too poor, they weren't able to afford, so he approached Bani Nadir. Because according to the treaty, the Jewish tribes, each side would help each other financially as well in a situation like this. So Rasulullah went with some Sahaba, went to Bani Nadir, went inside their fortification, and I think they were sitting down waiting to meet the elders or the leaders of Bani Nadir. The Jews of Bani Nadir then had this satanic idea of, they thought that this is an opportunity to kill the Prophet. The Prophet and the Sahaba were sitting near a building, so they thought they would send somebody up with a large rock. This person would come to the edge and throw the rock onto the head of the Prophet from a distance, and they would kill him. Rasulullah received a revelation from Jibreel saying this is what the Bani Nadir are planning to do. So he got up, he took this, and later on the Sahaba followed him. They all left Bani Nadir without saying anything. And the Prophet then revealed to the Sahaba what they were planning. So they sent out an army, because this was an act of war. They were planning to kill the leader of the Muslims. They laid siege to Bani Nadir. Siege lasted, I think, 10 days. And Bani Nadir surrendered, which is unusual because Bani Nadir were well stocked with supplies, with weapons, with food, and they were inside a fortification that could have kept going on for many, many months. But in the end, Allah said in the Quran, وَقَذَفَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمُ الرُّعْبِ, Allah threw fear, terror into their hearts of the Jews, and they surrendered. And in the end, the Prophet expelled them from Medina, and Bani Nadir went to Khaybar, to stay at Khaybar. This victory of Bani Nadir restored some of the prestige the Muslims had lost at the Battle of Uhud. Yes, in the Battle of Badr, so the Muslims and the Quraysh had agreed that 1 year after Uhud, they would meet in battle again at Badr again. The Muslims went out to Badr, and the Quraysh army started to leave Mecca. Then they decided to change their minds. They said, it's not worth it, we're not going to go. They made up some excuse about crops or something, not enough crops. They backed out of this battle. The Muslims camped at Badr for 8 days to show that they were not afraid of the enemy of Quraysh, and they were dominant. Now, The Jews, again, have not finished trying to kill the Prophet and trying to destroy Islam. So, Huyay ibn al-Akhtab, if you remember who this man was, anybody? Any said Huyay ibn al-Akhtab? Huyay ibn al-Akhtab was probably the leader, one of the leaders of Bani Nadir. His daughter was Safiya radiallahu anha, al-Mu'mineen radiallahu anha. So her father was an evil man, and he had this idea. He would go out to the Arab tribes again, and him and other Jews, a delegation of I think 20 Jews, they went to Quraysh, they went to a tribe called Bani Ghatafan, and to get them to raise a new army. This time, a huge army that would that could overwhelm. They thought that could be with overwhelming force to defeat the Muslims. And they were able to raise a new army of 10,000. And Bani Ghatafan, they raised 6,000, but they were, you could say, bribed with Jewish money. The Jews able to bribe them with a lot of money. But this new army was 10,000. So the Muslims now have learned the news, and they start preparing themselves. Okay. Today we'll talk about Al-Ahzab in more detail, inshallah. So, this army of 10,000 is unprecedented. This never happened in Arab history up until that time. They never dreamed of an army of 10,000, not in the Arabian Peninsula anyway. Some tribes would boast of having 1,000, being 1,000 strong. But now 10,000. This was something unusual. So Rasulullah holds Majlis Shura. So he has a meeting. And he did the same thing with the battles of Badr and Uhud. He would have a meeting to consult the other people on what the best way what to do and how to prepare and how to fight the enemy. Amongst those present was Salman al-Farisi radiallahu anhu. He recently earned his freedom. He was a slave, and he had converted a while back. But he was originally from Persia, and he mentioned in the meeting the idea of digging a ditch, a big ditch. He said back in Persia, this is what we did. If the enemy laid siege to us, we'd dig a big ditch. Everybody liked this idea, and they decided this is the best, we'll do this. They realized they needed to start this, to work immediately. They realized that the army of 10,000 would be on its way, but they had time. This is a big army. They probably had maybe 2 weeks to prepare themselves for the coming battle. That's a map of Medina in the middle, and Uhud is at the top. And you have what's called the lava field. So it's a hill, but it's also a lava field where lava was flowed. One to the east of Medina, one to the west. And this is Bani Qurayza here, down here. So basically Medina has 2 gaps, one here and one here, gaps where the enemy can come in and attack Medina. So mountains, and this is where they had Muslims decided to dig the big, huge trench. This trench was not a small trench. Apparently it's 12 kilometers. These are just some pictures of lava fields. This is in Medina itself. So lava, as it flows, or the ground is very hot, which is why the enemy couldn't just walk over the hill sometimes. Now, the trench that they dug was 5 meters deep. The width, 5 to 10 or 10 to 12 meters wide. So it had to be wide so the enemy couldn't just jump over easily. And it was 5 meters deep. And as I said, 12 kilometers long. which meant a huge amount of dirt had to be dug and removed. Now, if you compare that to today, we would probably need to use excavators, you need to use what they call those machines that break rocks, because the ground is not soft ground, it was hard, full of rocks. So, and the Muslims, the Prophet had at his disposal 3,000 people, but not all of them would be fighting or digging. So the 3,000 included women and children, the elderly. So even a smaller number than that would be digging. And they only had 2 weeks to dig it. And this is the miracle. How did they dig 12 kilometers in only 2 weeks with a smaller number of people, with ground that was hard? The people weren't experienced in digging. And at the same time, they didn't have enough food. The people were starving. So this is the first miracle of Al-Ahzab, the trench itself, 12 kilometers. Yep. Now, as I mentioned, Bani Qurayza were down here. There was a gap here. So that Rasulullah sent a message to Bani Qurayza to get them to confirm that the treaty was still valid. They had a treaty of defense, but part of the treaty was defense, mutual defense. So assist each other in defending Medina against any foreign or outside enemy. So Bani Qurayza confirmed this treaty. Now, some of the factors that led to the Muslims being able to dig the trench within that short time period was a few things. Rasulullah himself went and joined the people. He didn't just sit at home in luxury and not do anything. He went into digging the trench himself. He starved just as everybody else was starving. There wasn't enough food. And everybody has heard the story of people tying rocks to their stomachs. And then the Prophet revealed that he had 2 rocks to his stomach. He was more hungry, more starving than everybody else. It shows that when a leader joins the people are more likely to love him and follow him. Not when the leader is living in luxury where everybody else is starving and working hard. There's a beautiful story that one Sahabi, Jabir ibn Abdullah, had some small amount of food at his house, some rice, some meat. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to feed 1 or 2 persons, extra persons. So he saw that the Rasulullah was very hungry, starving, probably more hungry than everybody else. So he invites Rasulullah to his house to have dinner with him. So the Prophet, Rasulullah, he announces to everybody that Jabir has food at his house. Come, let's go and eat at his house. And the Prophet appears at his house with 1,000 people, 1,000. And Jabir now then is panicking. He says, I don't have, his wife is asking, did you not tell him that we only have a small amount of food? We can't afford to feed 1,000 people. And Jabir said, yes, I told him. So she said, then Allah and His Prophet know best. The Prophet arrives and he goes in and he starts helping to prepare the food. He takes bread out of the oven and helps to cook the food. And 10 people at a time would go in to the house, they would eat, they'll fill their stomachs and leave. 10 people will come, eat and leave. Up to 1,000 people were able to eat with the barakah of the Prophet having been there and helping to cook the food. The Prophet also continued to raise everybody's hopes. He would give them stories of future victories and the famous story is that he was breaking this big rock. He would say, I saw in these sparks the keys to Persia, and he strikes it again. I saw the keys in the sparks. I saw the keys to, as he was striking the rock with the axe, the sparks would fly, and he say, I saw the keys to I think Sham. Anyway, so he was saying that in the near future, Muslims would not just be victorious at Al-Ahzab, they would conquer these other great nations, these great civilizations. In addition, the Prophet would recite some poetry, not that he composed. The other Sahabi, Abdullah ibn Rawaha, had composed some poetry, and Rasulullah would recite this poetry in a beautiful way, and everybody else would probably listen to him or even repeat after him. So they, as I said, they managed to dig the ditch, and the army arrives, the Ahzab army, the army of the Quraysh and Ghatafan and some other tribes. And when they arrived, they were shocked, they were surprised. They had never seen this before in their entire lives, because this is something this idea was a Persian idea, not an Arab idea. The Arabs had never done this before. So they found this big ditch, and they found it difficult to march into Medina. Some small groups, people managed to jump across with their horses, such as Abd Wud, one of the mushrikeen, and he managed to cross over. Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib had a one-on-one duel with him and killed him. But this was all that the Ahzab army could do. Try to jump over, and the Muslims would be on permanent duty, watching the enemy to make sure the enemy, if they come over, they would quickly fight them and or push them back. Now this was, as I said, constant, and there were times when the Muslims would miss their prayers. So Asr prayer, or even Asr Maghrib, or Dhuhr Asr Maghrib, they missed. The Prophet was upset with that, but you had to do what the situation forced them to miss their prayers, and they did the qada. This siege kept on going even up to a month. And so after several weeks, the Ahzab army was getting impatient. They've been waiting, camping outside of Medina for 1 month. Nothing much has been happening. So Huyay ibn al-Akhtab, I mentioned him before. He was the one who convinced the Arabs to join forces to go to fight against the Muslims. He has this evil idea. He says he goes and approaches Bani Nadir, the last Jewish tribe in Medina, and convinces them. He'll try, and then he was able to convince them to switch sides to the Ahzab army. If they switch sides, then that could let the Ahzab army could then enter Medina from this end. Initially they were reluctant, they refused, but then he was able to convince them. So this is within the last few days of the Battle of Ahzab. Rasulullah learns the news that they switched sides and they were now getting ready to support the Ahzab. So the Prophet is thinking, what can he do? So he wants to make a split the alliance of the Ahzab army. You have Bani Ghatafan, Quraysh, and Bani Qurayza. So he sends out, tries to negotiate with Bani Ghatafan. He says, if you leave, we'll give you our crops from Medina for 1/3 of our yearly crops. So this is a lot of money, a lot of crops for them, and this is a great offer. The Prophet said this will be conditional, that the people of Medina would agree to this idea. So he puts the idea to the leaders of Aus al-Khazraj, and they didn't support the idea. They were not happy with this idea. They said, if we agree now and they leave, what's to stop them in the future from coming back and threatening us again to take to take our crops, seize or any property. So the idea didn't happen. So now again the Prophet is stuck. He doesn't know what else to do, and this is when Allah now steps in, and Allah starts to prepare the victory create the victory for the Muslims. Now there are a number of different agents, different soldiers or agents of Allah that Allah used to create the victory at Ahzab. The first of these agents is Sahabi named Nu'aym ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. Nu'aym ibn Mas'ud was from the tribe of Ghatafan, so one of the tribes laying siege to Medina. He was a non-Muslim and he had converted, but it's in secret. Nobody knew, hardly anybody knew that he had converted, especially not from his tribe. He somehow meets the Prophet in person. The Prophet himself didn't know. And he tells the Prophet that he has converted. And he asks the Prophet to tell him, give him a task, because he wants to support the Muslims. The Prophet didn't know what to do. He said, you are only one man, and do what you can. So Nu'aym ibn Mas'ud has the idea. He goes first to Bani Qurayza, the Jews in Medina, and says to them, because they don't know yet he's converted to Islam. He tells them that one day, if the Qurayshi, the Ahzab army, if they are not successful, they will go home. The Qurayshis will go to Mecca and the Ghatafan will go back to where they live. And because the Jews of Bani Qurayza had annulled, they've broken that treaty with the Muslims, what's going to happen then? The Muslims will turn against you to punish you. So he advises the Jews to demand from the Ahzab to send hostages, to force them to stay and fight. So the Jews agreed to this idea, they liked this idea. So Nu'aym ibn Mas'ud then leaves Bani Qurayza and goes to Quraysh. And he says to them that Bani Qurayza, the Jews in Medina, are now starting to regret their decision to switch sides, to break the treaty. And they will soon ask you to send them hostages. And now those hostages, they're going to use those hostages and hand them over to the Muslims as to compensate, to make up for the breaking the treaty. So he says, don't do. I think he said, don't send them hostages. Well, anyway, he tells them this is what Bani Qurayza will do. They will ask you for hostages. He approaches Bani Ghatafan and says the same thing he said to Quraysh. Soon afterwards, Bani Qurayza then send messages to Quraysh and Bani Ghatafan saying, give us some hostages. So at the same time, the Quraysh and Ghatafan remember what Nu'aym had told them, that they will demand hostages and then they will probably hand those hostages over to the Muslims. So they reject this idea, and this is at this point that the alliance between Bani Qurayza and the Ahzab army broke. At the same time, soon afterwards, Allah sent the next agent or soldier. A storm, a violent storm, very powerful storm, with a powerful wind and rain. The storm was so powerful that it blew away tents. It spilled over the cooking pots of the Ahzab army. It was very cold, and at that point, the Ahzab decided, that's it, we can't stay anymore. The weather is so bad. They give up. They leave. They go home. And the last of the angels there fighting at Ahzab as well. So after Ahzab, we know that Jibril approached the Prophet. He was dressed in armor, battle armor, and he sees the Prophet having laid down his armor. He says to him, why have you laid down your armor? Where I swear I have not taken off my armor. You need to go and fight now, but Bani Qurayza. So that was the Battle of Ahzab. Several miracles. The digging of the trench. For example, what Nu'aym ibn Mas'ud did was amazing and incredible, a miracle. And of course the storm. And in the end, the Ahzab army, the 10,000 army, 10,000 was split up and went home. As I said, Jibril approached the Prophet and he instructs him to go and fight Bani Qurayza straight away. The Prophet, then everybody's tired, but then the Prophet says, we have to get up and go and fight Bani Qurayza. Lay siege to Bani Qurayza. They laid siege to Bani Qurayza. The army goes and lays siege to Bani Qurayza, and that lasts another 25 days. So 4 weeks, a month, Ahzab, and then 25 days, another 25 days after that, laying siege to Bani Qurayza. And in the end, the same thing, Allah sent terror in the hearts of the Jews. They surrendered. Some people from Al-Aws tried to plead for clemency to the Prophet, to ask the Prophet to let them live, survive, because the Prophet was angry with them. He didn't, so the Prophet said, we'll choose somebody else, an arbitrator, someone who will decide what to do with Bani Qurayza. And the Prophet selected Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiallahu anhu to make judgment on Bani Qurayza. Bani Qurayza were initially happy with this decision because Sa'd ibn Mu'adh had a good relationship. They had a good relationship with Sa'd ibn Mu'adh. He was the leader of Bani I think, Al-Aws. Sa'd then decided, despite the fact that he was friendly with them, they were good, had a good relationship with Bani Qurayza, he decided then that all the men of Bani Qurayza were to be executed, and the women and children taken as prisoners, and the wealth of Bani Qurayza distributed amongst the Muslims. About 400 men were executed, and amongst them was Hayy ibn Akhtab. So Hayy ibn Akhtab was from Bani Nadir, but he made an oath to Bani Qurayza that whatever happens to them, he will be there amongst them. If they were to be executed, he will be there to be executed. So all the men are getting executed, including Hayy ibn Akhtab. And just before he died, Hayy ibn Akhtab said that whoever fights Allah will be undoubtedly defeated. Just before he died. Sa'd ibn Mu'adh as well, he had sustained an injury, critical injury during the Ahzab, and he was probably dying from that injury. And soon after he made that decision, that judgment or whatever for the execution, he himself passed away. And the Prophet said that Allah loved him so much that the throne of Allah shook when Sa'd ibn Mu'adh passed away. The other thing about Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiallahu anhu was his funeral, the janazah. When the people went to pick up his body to take him to the grave, they found his body light, very light and easy to take. And the Prophet said this because the angels had come and helped them to carry the body, the angels themselves. So there's been a lot of controversy recently about the Prophet and the Muslims killing the Jews, calling them anti-Semitic or all this other nonsense. But if you look at the context, you look at why it happened, if Bani Qurayza had allowed the enemy army to enter the Medina, the enemy army would have entered Medina and slaughtered everybody, killed everybody. So the Muslims would have been killed had the enemy army entered Medina. So, which is why their execution was justice. And on top of that, they had a treaty. There was signed a treaty which they had confirmed. The treaty which included mutual defense of the city. The treaty did not include betrayal and treason and switching sides of the enemy army. And there's the famous saying of the Prophet, Al-an naghzum wa la yaghzuna. So after the victory at Ahzab, Prophet said this line, meaning now we will take the fight to the enemy, not them coming to fight us. So up until then, before Ahzab, it was the Quraysh that had been fighting the Muslims, marching all the way to Medina, to Badr and to Uhud. Now that was over. Now the Muslims would had become powerful, and they would now take the fight to the enemy, to Quraysh. Okay, and that was all I had. Any comments or questions from anybody? Or about Ahzab?
I love the story of when it was on the cold windy nights.
Yeah.
The Prophet ﷺ asked which Sahabi would be willing to go and check on the enemy campsite, and no one moved. And there was like the top Sahaba there, and no one wanted to put their hands up. And then he chose one, and as soon as the Sahabi stood up, he felt like he was in a hammam, like he felt so warm. He didn't feel any cold, and he went to the enemy, until he came back. That's when he felt cold again, when he sat down. SubhanAllah, like when you take the first step, Allah takes care of the rest.
SubhanAllah. Yeah, exactly. Jazakumullah khair. Yeah.
Yeah.